5 years ago, I was working as The Economist's international editor, and one fateful day, I think in 2017, a senior editor sat down next to me at lunch and said, "Do you know why the kids keep coming home and saying such and such is trans?" And I said, "No idea. Shall I look into it for you?" So that conversation changed my life. I ended up writing an article about it, and it wasn't a very good article because something very strange happened. I couldn't get anyone to talk to me about it. I would reach out to potential interviewees, and they seemed to think that I was doing something very wrong by just doing what I had been doing when I did my job ever since I started work at The Economist, which was to just ask the questions that came to my mind in ordinary language. So I was asking basic questions like, well, what does it mean to be trans, and what does transition mean? Do people feel better afterwards? Why do some people say they feel like members of the opposite sex? And the big one, should those feelings give them license to use facilities intended for the opposite sex? Well, I couldn't get any answers. I got told that I was a bigot for asking. And the science denial that was common among all the proponents of what they called trans rights, and the circularity of their core mantra, namely that trans women are women, which raises and leaves unanswered the question of what a woman then is, well, all of that kept bothering me. And then I became seriously concerned that very bad things were happening because of this ideology. Harms to women who were losing single-sex spaces, sports, services, and associations. To children who were being taught that your sex is a matter of your feelings. And to lesbians, gay people in general, but lesbians in particular, who were being asked, pressured indeed, to include men who identify as women in their dating pools. I started thinking about writing a book about it. And by now I knew that women were losing their jobs for talking about this. I had met Maya Forstater, and I understood that this was something that we really needed to talk about, but I was afraid I wasn't the right person. And if I'm honest, I was also worried about the toll it would take on me. But then in late 2018, I met detransitioners for the first time. These are young people who thought for a while that they were trans, took steps towards changing their bodies to match their gender identities, whatever that means, and then realized that they had been mistaken. This group was a group of half dozen girls who now identified as lesbians. The oldest of them was 23. She had had her uterus and her ovaries removed at 21. She had a very severe eating disorder, and it was that and her lesbianism that had convinced her she was meant to be a man. The therapist told her that she was trying to starve away her curves because she wasn't meant to be female. And that night, for the first time, I articulated a thought that I had been circling around but had not yet said clearly to myself, and that was, they are sterilizing gay kids. And that was when my hesitations vanished, because as a journalist, you run towards the news, you run towards the story. When you discover a scandal that's being suppressed for political convenience, you shouldn't ignore it. So I wrote the book, Trans When Ideology Meets Reality, and it came out in 2021. And my career continued completely fine at The Economist. I wasn't cancelled or anything like that. But I just became convinced I was in the wrong place. Something really bad is happening. I saw it. I paid the price of speaking up about it. So I decided to leave, and I joined Sex Matters, which is a campaign group that was founded by Maya Forstater, who lost her job for saying the same sorts of things, and took an employment rights tribunal to establish in British law the fact that you can say there are two sexes without losing your job. I still boggle when I say that. I now believe that what she and I were talking about, what I call gender identity ideology in my book, is a very much the opposite of the liberal and kind approach it's portrayed as. I think it's part of a generation-defining threat to liberalism, and indeed to rationalism, and I also think it's deeply cruel. So you can imagine that thinking that, I feel I have to say it out loud, as clearly as I can, as often as I can, and to as many people as I can. This is an ideology that harms women, because women's ability to play a full part in public life requires us to be able to draw boundaries. And on occasion, those boundaries need to exclude all men. That's all men, including the men who wish they weren't men, the men who think they're women, and the men who identify as anything other than men. It's also harmful to children, because children believe what adults tell them. And if you tell children that you can become a member of the opposite sex, that's seductive to some children. It's particularly seductive to the ones who are going to grow up gay, but also to the ones who have eating disorders or on the autistic spectrum, the anxious, self-harming, depressed, or abused ones. And it's harmful to gay people. If you don't have a definition of sex, then you don't have a definition of sexual orientation. And if the two sexes are mixed sex groups, this is stupid, I know, it's not my fault, then being a lesbian means that you would sleep with somebody of either sex. So I know a lot of lesbians by now. My social group is at least half lesbians, and they are under constant pressure to allow men into lesbian groups and to consider men as potential sexual partners. But the other reason is that it's disproportionately gay kids who are getting caught up in this. Kids who are going to grow up gay, because they're the kids who are more gender non-conforming, just statistically, of course, not a universal rule. Now, everything I've said is hateful, apparently, because it punctures people's dearly held beliefs about themselves and their identities. So I understand that somebody who identifies as trans hears what I say and finds it unkind. I don't revel in that. I don't like being unkind. I don't want to be hateful. I'm not a natural controversialist. I don't look out for controversy for its own sake, and I don't like having rows. I'm also not someone who shies away from those things. And on this subject, I know where the harms are, and I know where the unkindness is. And it's not on the things that I'm saying, it's on the things that this ideology is doing. So what does it do when you base public policy on a lie? On substituting self-declared gender identity for the objective material reality of sex? Well, for women it means that there are men in rape crisis centres, that there are rapists in women's prisons, that there are men winning women's sporting prizes. Probably most people here have heard of Bobby Kardashian, who is a deeply violent and disturbed young man who has a piece of paper saying that he's a woman from the Irish government. And because he's in jail for threatening and committing violent crimes, he was held in the women's jail in Limerick until very recently. And he was only moved because the prison guards couldn't cope with him, not because they cared about the other women. For children, if you tell them lies about their bodies and the material reality about being a member of a mammalian species, you create mental distress and confusion. We're telling children that if they don't fit into the pink or blue box that matches their sex, then they should just jump into the other box and cut the body parts off to make them fit there. And for gay people, well, I know lesbians who have been banned from lesbian-only dating sites because they have said, only interested in females. This is by its nature a linguistic movement. There is no material reality to the statement that you are trans. There is nothing about that except the statement. And that is why, when somebody declares their pronouns and everyone else is supposed to ignore the evidence of their own senses and their own understanding of human nature and accept that people are who they say they are, they must try to stop you if you refuse to do that, because the words are all they have. And so it's no coincidence that this draconian, Orwellian, I've run out of fancy big words, hate crime bill, which is considering enshrining within it a circular, non-reality-based definition of gender or gender identity. It also doesn't define hate, as John already said. I know what it feels like to be targeted by hate. I get serious death threats, some of them from men who identify as women who I know have serious criminal records. And they express those threats in gruesome, sexualized, personalized ways. Last weekend in Manchester, I was followed down the road by about 100 men, some of them with loudhailers, shouting the usual idiotic slogans with a couple of additions, fuck Helen Joyce, my body, my choice, and there are many, many more of us than you. It would make some sense to call that hateful, but to be clear, I don't think we need a new law to deal with it. We just need better policing, and we already have public order offences. And Irish legislators are considering passing a law that will criminalise me for saying what these men don't want me to say. I think this law could probably criminalise mere possession of the book that I blew my life up to write. I know there's a safety clause and it excuses works of scientific or artistic merit, but I don't think the people who call me a Nazi, genocidal, anti-Semitic, racist, homophobic, transphobic, and shout fuck Helen Joyce think my work has scientific or artistic merit. And it's not so much that I really know that I'll be charged and found guilty, it's that I don't know I won't be. It's called the chilling effect for a reason. Most people agree with me entirely. I know that from polls and I know it from my inbox. But people don't dare to say so, and I do, and I'm not going to stop saying it. I'm going to keep saying these specific things, and I'm going to keep saying them even if this new law comes in, and I will come here and I will say them wherever I damn well like. Being a man or a woman is entirely a matter of biology and not at all a matter of identity. Men can't be women. None of them can be women, no matter how much they want to. Children should not be given puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones. They shouldn't be told they can change sex. They shouldn't be told that their feelings define their identities. No man, and that includes men who say they're women, should be allowed into women's spaces or sports. If Ireland does pass this law, I will come here and I will say that, and I will say it again, because I feel a moral imperative. Even if you don't feel the same urgency as I do on this particular subject, I hope you will support me, because my free speech is your free speech. You don't know what unpopular thing you may one day feel a moral imperative to say. Thank you.